At just 34 years old, Captain Ibrahim Traoré rose from frontline soldier to interim leader of Burkina Faso in one of the fastest power shifts in modern African history. In this video, we trace his extraordinary journey, from a young geologist turned soldier to the youngest head of state on the continent, his bold breakout from Western influence, his dramatic pivot toward Russia and Pan-African unity, and the whirlwind of praise and criticism that surrounds him. This isn't just a biography, it's the story of an entire nation at a crossroads, of youth, revolution, geopolitics, and legacy. Strap in for a gripping ride through Burkina Faso's insurgency-wrecked north, the gold-rich mines, and the radical reshaping of power across the Sahel. If you like stories of bold leadership, Africa's future, and seismic global change, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell to join the journey. Picture this. A 34-year-old soldier walks into the presidential palace in West Africa, and no one expected it. Who is this man? How did a relatively unknown military officer become head of state overnight? And why is the world watching? Ibrahim Traoré was born on the 14th of March 1988 in the village of Kera, situated in the Bondoukoui commune of Mouhoun province in western Burkina Faso. His upbringing in the rural heartland of his country gave him roots, far removed from the neon lights of capitals and the halls of government. But while his start was modest, his ambition and conviction would soon propel him into uncharted territory. As a young student, he showed promise. He pursued geology at the University of Ouagadougou, combining academic rigor with political awareness. Even at this early stage, he was drawn into student associations and became known for defending his classmates in disputes, a quality that foreshadowed his leadership instincts. In 2009, he joined the Burkina Faso Armed Forces, commencing what would be a rapid and unusual march through the ranks. His early military career was anything but smooth or predictable. Burkina Faso was already under strain from jihadist insurgency, spilling over from neighboring Mali and the wider Sahel. Equipment was scant, morale was often low, and the government struggled to contain the threat. Traoré himself later said he grew increasingly frustrated by what he saw: frontline soldiers lacking kit, while political elites filled their pockets. Then came a turning point. As a captain by 2020, Traoré was part of an artillerist regiment and had been deployed in combat zones where his courage and tenacity began to attract attention. But it wasn't just battlefield heroics. It was his message that the state must serve the soldier, the citizen, the youth. His name began circulating quietly at first, among soldiers and younger citizens craving change. In September 2022, he seized the moment. The dissatisfaction within the armed forces, particularly among younger officers, reached a boiling point. The incumbent interim president, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, was seen as failing to halt the insurgency and losing the confidence of his troops. Traoré positioned himself as the alternative, the soldier who would act, not just talk. When the coup unfolded on the 30th of September 2022, it sent shockwaves through West Africa. Few had anticipated such a rapid ascension, but within days, on the 6th of October 2022, Traoré was officially declared head of state. At approximately 34 years old, he became the youngest serving head of state in Africa and one of the youngest globally. What made his takeover even more fascinating was the symbolism behind it. Here was a young leader in fatigues and beret, not traditional suit and tie, aligning himself with a new type of leadership, one rooted in youth, in the soldier, in the front lines. He tapped into the hopes of a generation that believed the old order had failed them. He presented a bold message: No more business as usual. And yet, while his rise was dramatic, it also came with enormous risk. The country was riven by violence, the economy strained, external powers watching. Taking power was one thing, making it stick while transforming the system would be another. This tension between expectation and reality is central to Traoré's story. In this video, we will follow 8 key chapters of that story: his humble beginnings and training, his experience on the front lines of insurgency, the coup and the takeover, his bold foreign policy shift, the economic front, especially the gold sector, the controversies and cult of personality that swirl around him, and finally, the question of legacy. What will the young soldier-turned-leader leave behind? By the end of this journey, you'll gain insight not only into Ibrahim Traoré and the country he leads, but into the broader currents reshaping Africa right now. Youth rejecting colonial legacies, insurrection morphing into new state visions, and a continent that might just be writing a new chapter. In the next section, we'll step back even further to his student days and early soldiering, examining how the geology student became a frontline warrior and how his training prepared him for the storm to come. What drives a geology student to trade textbooks for bullets? How does a young man studying rock formations end up leading soldiers through war zones? The transformation of Ibrahim Traoré is not just a career pivot, it's a symbol of an entire generation's shift in Africa. At the University of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim wasn't just another student cramming for exams. He was known for his leadership in student circles, often standing up for those without a voice. Though quiet in demeanor, those who knew him recall his intense focus and his refusal to accept injustice. Even in small classroom disputes, this same determination would later translate into leadership under fire. By 2009, his decision to join the army seemed radical. Many questioned it. He could have pursued a stable career in mining or government geology. But for Traoré, it wasn't about money. It was about purpose. The country was changing. The threat of extremism was spreading, and he chose to be part of the fight. That decision would define the next decade of his life. Training wasn't easy. The Burkina Faso military was underfunded, under-equipped, and often overwhelmed. But this environment hardened him. He trained as an artillery officer, learning discipline, tactics, and, most importantly, the emotional resilience needed on the front lines. The young geology student quickly earned the respect of senior officers, not just for his performance, but for his composure under pressure. Assigned to areas under constant threat of jihadist attacks, Traoré began to understand the true cost of leadership. His fellow soldiers were dying. Civilians were terrified. Morale was crumbling. Corruption at the top made things worse. It was here on the front lines, not in political offices, where Traoré's views on leadership, governance, and betrayal began to form. What began as service evolved into something deeper. By 2018, he was fighting not just external threats, but internal rot. His unit, often left without adequate support, still managed to repel insurgent advances. This earned him admiration from fellow soldiers, who saw in him something rare, a leader who fought beside them, not behind them. It was during this time that Traoré began to quietly build alliances within the army, not for power but for change. Junior officers were frustrated, commanders were failing. He became a symbol of that frustration and, more importantly, of hope. When they whispered of change, they spoke his name. Traoré's journey from student activist to frontline commander wasn't an accident. It was a natural evolution driven by conviction, duty, and first-hand exposure to a system that was failing its people. In the next section, we'll move to the battlefield. The chaos of Burkina's north, the horrors of the Sahel insurgency, and how Traoré emerged from it more than just a soldier, but as a future leader in the making. Imagine fighting an enemy you can't always see, in terrain you barely know, for a cause your government barely supports. This was the reality for Ibrahim Traoré and his comrades, trapped in a war that most of the world ignored. But out of this chaos, a new kind of leader was forged. By the early 2000s, Burkina Faso had become a battlefield. Jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS were spilling over from Mali and Niger, exploiting weak borders and even weaker state control. Towns in the north and east of the country became no-go zones. Soldiers were ambushed, civilians massacred, and the government in Ouagadougou appeared helpless. Traoré was deployed to some of the most dangerous regions, Soum, San-Matenga, Oudalan. These were not traditional battlefields. These were ambush zones, IED-laced trails, and intelligence black holes. His unit often went days without proper food or ammunition, relying on sheer grit and local support to survive. Traoré saw friends killed. He watched villages burn. But more than anything, he saw betrayal. Commanders in the capital diverted funds. Supplies meant for troops vanished. Politicians gave speeches but refused to visit the north. For Traoré, this wasn't just a military failure, it was a moral one, and it lit a fire inside him. He started pushing back, not recklessly, but decisively. He questioned orders that endangered civilians. He challenged commanders who ignored intelligence. His outspokenness earned him both admiration and enemies. Some saw him as a threat to the military status quo. Others saw him as exactly the leader Burkina Faso needed. His reputation spread, not through official ranks, but through whispered conversations between soldiers. Traoré doesn't leave anyone behind. He shares his rations. He fights like one of us. These weren't just compliments, they were seeds of loyalty. Loyalty that would later become the backbone of a rebellion. By 2021, Burkina Faso was spiraling. More than a third of the country was effectively controlled by insurgents. Entire provinces were under siege. And within the army, a quiet storm was building. Junior officers, battle-hardened and disgusted, began discussing the unthinkable, removing the leadership themselves. In every one of those conversations, one name kept coming up: Ibrahim Traoré. The war in the Sahel didn't just scar Traoré, it shaped him. It gave him purpose, credibility, and followers. But it also gave him a front-row seat to the systemic failure of an entire government. In the next section, we'll witness the moment he decided to stop following and take control. The coup of 2022 was more than a power grab. It was an explosion of rage, loyalty, and hope. On the morning of September 30th, 2022, the people of Burkina Faso woke up to a now familiar sound: gunfire in the capital. But this time, something was different. A name that was barely known outside the barracks just 48 hours before was suddenly everywhere: Ibrahim Traoré. How did this soft-spoken captain take down a sitting president in less than a day? To understand the coup, you need to understand what came before it. Just 8 months earlier, another military man, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, had ousted President Roch Kabore, promising to end jihadist violence. But by late 2022, the violence had only worsened. Confidence collapsed. In some cases, soldiers refused to deploy. Civilians protested. Faith in Damiba crumbled. Behind the scenes, discontent brewed among the younger ranks. They felt the revolution had been hijacked. Damiba spent more time making international appearances than visiting the front lines. Reports began circulating that he was seeking a deal with France to build a military base, a red line for many Burkinabe nationalists, especially Traoré. Traoré and a group of junior officers had had enough. They had fought, bled, and watched friends die for a country being run like a corporation. On September 30th, they made their move. The elite Cobra unit stormed the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. By noon, state TV was off air, roads were blocked, military helicopters circled. At 8 p.m., Traoré appeared on national television flanked by masked soldiers. Calm, clear, and resolute, he announced the suspension of the constitution, the dissolution of the government, and the ousting of Damiba. Burkina Faso had a new leader, and he was 34 years old. The reaction was immediate and electric. In Ouagadougou and across the country, young people took to the streets, not in protest but in celebration. Posters of Thomas Sankara reappeared. Crowds chanted, "Vive le Capitaine!" Traoré's youth and military background gave him instant credibility, but what truly ignited the public's support was his message. Burkina Faso will not be a colony of anyone. Within days, Traoré consolidated power. Damiba fled to Togo. The military rallied behind the new captain. He met with religious leaders, civil society groups, and international observers. But while calm returned to the capital, the real storm was only beginning. The coup of 2022 wasn't just a military maneuver. It was a symbolic rupture from the past. In the next section, we'll follow Traoré as he embarks on a bold foreign policy overhaul, cutting ties with the West, expelling French forces, and forging a new path for Burkina Faso. The world started watching, but Traoré didn't blink. One of Ibrahim Traoré's first moves after taking power wasn't domestic, it was geopolitical. He sent a message heard around the world. Burkina Faso will no longer be under the thumb of the West. Within months, French troops were gone, Russian flags were flying at protests, and new alliances were forming in the shadows. What was Traoré really planning? To understand the weight of this move, you need to understand Burkina Faso's past. For decades, France maintained deep influence in its former colonies. Military bases, mining interests, currency control. Even after independence, many African leaders depended on Paris for aid, arms, and approval. But Traoré wasn't interested in maintaining the old game. By early 2023, he publicly criticized French military operations in the Sahel, calling them ineffective and self-serving. In January, he ordered the French military to leave Burkina Faso, giving them just 1 month to pack up and go. This was unprecedented. No African leader had expelled France with such speed and confidence in years. Where others saw isolation, Traoré saw opportunity. He began forging ties with other military-led governments in Mali and Niger. The three countries would later form the Alliance of Sahel States, an anti-terror, anti-imperialist bloc that shook the African Union and ECOWAS. Then came Russia. While Traoré never openly declared a military alliance, the signs were clear. Increasing Russian diplomatic presence, training exchanges, and a sharp rise in pro-Russia sentiment online. Wagner Group fighters were reportedly operating in the region, offering security support where the West had failed. Traoré played the balance masterfully, never confirming, never denying. The West responded with concern. France condemned the move. The U.S. warned of dangerous influences. But Traoré didn't back down. He doubled down. He began using rhetoric that echoed Sankara: self-sufficiency, sovereignty, African solutions to African problems. He rejected aid packages with strings. He welcomed cooperation, but not interference. At home, his popularity soared. To many Burkinabé, he was finally doing what no leader had dared, standing up. Online, he was hailed as a new Sankara. In rallies, young people raised placards reading "Our country, our rules." This wasn't just politics. It was a cultural awakening. With France out and new friends stepping in, Traoré wasn't just shifting alliances. He was redefining what African leadership could look like. But standing up to the world powers comes at a cost. In the next section, we'll look at the economic battleground, how Traoré turned his eyes to Burkina's most prized resource, gold, and what happened when he tried to take control of it. What happens when a young revolutionary leader decides to take back control of a billion-dollar gold industry from global mining giants? What happens when he accuses foreign companies of theft and corruption and then nationalizes the entire supply chain? That's exactly what Ibrahim Traoré did, and it sent shockwaves through global markets. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's top gold producers. In 2022 alone, it exported over 70 tons of gold. But here's the catch. Most of the profit didn't stay in the country. Multinational companies, mostly French, Canadian, and South African, controlled extraction, refining, and export. Local communities saw little more than dust. Traoré knew this, and he made it personal. "We are sitting on gold, but we live in poverty," he said in a national address, so he acted. In 2023, his government began nationalizing small-scale mines and auditing foreign contracts. Then came the bombshell, the announcement of Burkina Faso's first state-run gold refinery, capable of processing 200 kilograms per day. This refinery wasn't just economic, it was symbolic. A national facility operated by Burkinabe hands, refining Burkinabe gold. No middlemen, no Western oversight, just sovereignty. It was a direct hit to the legacy of neo-colonial economics. Traoré was telling the world, "We don't need you to manage our wealth." But resistance came fast. Some foreign investors withdrew. Others threatened arbitration. Anonymous sources accused the military of mismanaging the sector. International watchdogs raised alarms about transparency. But inside Burkina Faso, people saw it differently. They saw justice. For the first time, the gold beneath their feet might actually build roads, schools, and hospitals. Traoré's economic vision extended beyond gold. He announced reforms to agriculture, launched programs to improve rural electrification, and talked openly about creating a new national currency, one not tied to the CFA franc, which many see as a colonial relic. These moves made him even more of a target. Western diplomats warned of economic instability. ECOWAS raised concerns. But Traoré pressed on, relying on popular support and the narrative of resistance. To his supporters, every attack from abroad only proved he was doing something right. By taking control of Burkina Faso's gold, Traoré declared war, not with bullets, but with balance sheets. He challenged the foundations of global economic power in West Africa. But such moves are dangerous. In the next section, we look at the consequences, the cult of personality forming around him, the rising criticisms, and the looming question, how long can he hold it all together? Every revolutionary walks a tightrope between hero and dictator, between liberator and authoritarian. As Ibrahim Traoré's popularity soared, so did the concerns. Is he building a nation or a cult of personality? Is he standing up for the people or consolidating unchecked power? Across Burkina Faso, murals of Traoré now appear on walls. Children wear berets like his. Streets are renamed in his honor. His speeches are shared like gospel. He is compared openly to Thomas Sankara, another young soldier who rose to power with fire and vision. But history has taught us that charisma and idealism are only part of the story. Inside the country, there are growing voices of caution. Civil liberties have shrunk. Opposition parties are restricted. Journalists report intimidation. The press landscape is shrinking. While many citizens say they trust Traoré's intentions, others warn that centralizing power under one man, no matter how well-meaning, is dangerous. There's also a military paradox. Traoré came to power by force and remains in power through military backing. Can a system born out of coup truly transition to democracy? He promised elections by 2024, but later said it may take longer, citing security challenges. Critics fear that delay could stretch indefinitely. And then there's the youth. Many of his biggest supporters are young people who see him as a revolutionary symbol. But revolution is hard to maintain when jobs are scarce. Inflation is rising and insecurity still plagues large swaths of the country. Traoré's challenge is not just to inspire, it's to deliver. International watchdogs continue to raise alarms. Human Rights Watch and Reporters Without Borders have flagged abuses. ECOWAS remains wary. France accuses him of anti-democratic regression. And while Traoré's supporters wave Russian flags at rallies, Russia remains opaque in its commitments. He is in many ways isolated by choice, but also by force. Yet despite all this, Traoré continues to command deep loyalty at home. For many, he's still the man who dared to say no to the West, who stood with the soldiers and who promised to rebuild the country with Burkina Faso hands. The hope is real, but so is the risk. As the line between savior and strongman begins to blur, one thing is clear: Traoré's legacy is still being written. In the final section, we'll ask the hardest question of all: what will that legacy be? And can the young captain really lead Burkina Faso to the future he dreams of? In just over a year, Ibrahim Traoré went from anonymous artillery captain to global headline, hailed as a hero by some, feared by others. But history doesn't judge by speeches or slogans, it judges by results. So, what will his legacy be? Traoré has already changed the course of Burkina Faso. He's expelled a foreign military superpower. He's defied Western expectations and built new alliances. He's taken bold steps to control national resources and push for economic independence. He's inspired millions across Africa with a message of self-determination and dignity. But these accomplishments come with deep challenges. The fight against insurgency continues. The country's economy remains fragile. Critics grow louder about media freedom, democratic delays, and unchecked military power. And so, the question remains: can Traoré balance revolution with responsibility? Can he turn youthful momentum into sustainable transformation? Can he avoid the fate of so many charismatic leaders who lost themselves in their own myths? Burkina Faso stands at a crossroads, and with it, perhaps, a broader question for all of Africa. Can the continent's next generation truly take power back? Not just from foreign hands, but from the legacies of corruption, complacency, and compromise. Whatever your view of Ibrahim Traoré, hero, opportunist, revolutionary, risk, one thing is undeniable: he has dared to do what few leaders ever attempt, and in doing so he has forced a nation and a continent to rethink what leadership can look like. If this story moved you, made you think, or challenged your view of African politics, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the leaders, movements, and moments that are reshaping the world. And tell us in the comments, is Ibrahim Traoré the future Africa needs, or a cautionary tale in the making?